Okay, minimalist network ABM model with assortive network dynamics preferential mix. Do you see that? Okay, so we're going to open this up. And there's good and bad news when it comes to preferential mixing. Bad news is any logic doesn't provide automatic support for it. Well, let me put it this way. It doesn't provide built-in support to make it happen. You just impose this preference matrix. The good news is it ain't hard to achieve. And this model gives one way you can achieve it, okay? So here within this model, as I recall, this was something I built for someone I met in Sydney, I believe, during a boot camp at University of New South Wales a couple years back, 3 years back. And here we're going to have some affinity for people of a certain sort. So in other words, okay, I am going to, okay, right. So I'm just remembering what was in this model. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's go start from the basics. So within person here, we're going to have a state chart, and I'll go find it here. Okay. Mumble. Okay. I thought we had a. Okay, maybe I didn't even have a state chart. What I had is gain of partnership and loss of partnership. Okay, and basically they're going to change partners with a certain rate, and that will be based on the current number of partners they have plus times a rate of partnership loss, and then they're going to gain it where you have a similar factors governing it, and basically you have some asymptotic connection count. So if we run this model, what we should see is people gaining and losing partners here within this population. So people at any given time have a certain number of partners, and over time they form new partnerships and they break partnerships. Okay, they're arranged according to males and females. Incidentally, the way this is achieved, that layout, we have in main a statement that we will put people in a ring layout. Okay, a ring layout. I went to main and I scroll down to the network and space the network area, and we say a layout of ring, and we haven't used that feature of any logic yet, just because it's, among other things, it's more fragile with open populations. But if you have a population and you just say at the agent animation location, that will set their location. So we place them in a ring, and then each person is governed by this certain dynamics associated with forming and breaking connections. So they form and break connections. And I have an empirical connection histogram here to characterize how many people have connections, how frequent the connections are of different numbers of people, the relative frequency of seeing a certain number of connections. Okay, and basically this model will be changing those connections over time okay, I put this into place. I'm not even sure that's fully used now. I'll have to come back to that. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, this person is gaining partners and losing partners according to certain rules, and connections are being added to them. And when these connections are being added to them, we basically will get individuals who are more preferentially connected, and we'll connect to them. So this samples from other connections according to a probability it's more likely to be connected with someone that you have a greater affinity for. And I thought I had a more staged mechanism for this, to do this, and I'm looking for it here. Here we go. Yeah, so there's an algorithm for selecting persons for new connections. It's called Select Persons for New Connections in Person. You can find it over here in Person by Select Persons for New Connections, where basically I go through and I find people in the population to whom to connect, and here I think I use this method, populate new connection weighting for each population member. So basically I go through each person in the population, I figure out the weight of affinity I have for that person, and it's this one here. I go through and I basically figure out, okay, how much affinity do I have for that person? And that's based on this relationship here, where basically I have a function affinity for person only considering connection count, affinity for person only considering sex, and affinity for person considering income. And so basically I have greater affinity for someone with an income similar to mine, and that's based on this relationship. This is a Gaussian distribution where the idea is the further someone is from me, I'm in income, the less likely I am to connect for them. And then I have affinity based on network. If it's someone of the other sex, so if my sex is the same as this other person, I have no affinity to connect to them. Otherwise, I have a perfect affinity. So here you could relax this if you want to allow same-sex partnerships for MSM or STI concerns, and then based on connection count, I have the option of sort of having a greater affinity for someone who has a higher number of connections. I like to connect with someone who's influential or something like that. Right now, I'm only considering sex and income. Okay. So here I have an algorithm, and it's lunchtime and there's too little time to go through it. But basically I have an algorithm that will label, for me, it will label how much affinity I feel to different people in the population, and then it will draw from that population according to those affinities, so that I'm more likely, when I'm going to form a new connection, to connect to someone who's like me. And then I break a connection, now that opens up a greater likelihood I'll form a new connection. So that's the basic way that this works. And these affinities are put in place to be quite general, in the sense that by changing these particular values, I could tune it so that I can have very assortive mixing between groups or less assortive mixing. And with a little bit of mechanism, I could add ethnicity in, or I could add, country of origin or what have you. So this is a preferential network. It's a network that involves dynamics, gaining of partnerships and loss of partnerships, with adding the connection, and a fair bit of mechanism, I have to say, looking at this, to get a new connection. There's a couple layers of logic here for selecting people and for weighting them by affinity and for picking one accordingly. That's sort of the basic mechanisms by which it works. This basic framework could be used for many different types of mixing, but getting in place this affinity-based mixing takes a bit of mechanism, and this is why I give it out, so people can reuse it if they're interested in this. Okay? So that was affinity. So we've gone through a bunch of types of models here, and I appreciate your patience with this.